Ethan's boots crunched against the icy surface of Thyra 9. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with swirling clouds of frozen dust. The mining colony ahead looked small, even from a distance, but it was alive with activity. Machines hummed, conveyor belts clanged, and lights blinked faintly through the constant mist. Ethan adjusted his jacket against the cold and checked his equipment. As a human engineer, he was trained to handle emergencies, but this assignment felt different. There was something about this place, remote and quiet, that set him on edge. He had been sent to repair the colony's energy conduits. The reports were clear. Several of the main power lines had failed, and the colony risked complete blackout if repairs weren't made quickly. It wasn't just a matter of machinery, it was survival. Without power, the heating systems would fail, oxygen supplies would drop, and the miners could be trapped inside the tunnels. Ethan stepped through the main entrance, brushing snow from his gloves. The air inside was warmer, but it smelled faintly, of oil and ozone. The colony's automated systems beeped and whirred, responding to his presence. He followed the schematics projected on his wrist device, moving quickly through corridors lined with pipes and vents. As he rounded a corner, he froze. There, standing near a flickering terminal, was a humanoid figure. She was small and delicate-looking, with pale skin that almost glowed against the dim light. Her hair was silver and flowed like liquid down her back. Her eyes, wide and bright, reflected the flickering lights around her. She was examining the terminal with careful precision, her hands moving in ways that suggested both intelligence and hesitation. Ethan's first thought was surprise. No one had mentioned another person in this section of the colony. He raised, his hand slowly showing he meant no harm. "Hello?" he said, his voice calm. "Are you part of the colony?" The woman looked up sharply. She froze as if caught in mid-motion. Her gaze met his, and for a long moment, neither spoke. She did not answer. She did not move. It was as if she had never seen a human up close before. Ethan took a careful step forward. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm an engineer. I'm here to fix the power lines." He gestured to his tools. "I won't hurt you." She blinked rapidly, her eyes scanning his face, his uniform, the tools in his hands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she relaxed a little. Then she returned to the terminal, her hands resuming their work. Ethan studied her. She was clearly intelligent. The way she examined the equipment, the precision in her movements, it was beyond what he would expect from someone unfamiliar with human machinery. But there was something else too, something fragile, a tension that ran through her posture, a hesitation in her every motion. She was cautious, wary of every sound, every step. He approached the generator she was working on. Sparks flew from a broken conduit and he jumped slightly. The woman glanced at him, her eyes widening again, but she did not move to intervene. Ethan sighed and knelt down to inspect the damage. The wires were frayed and the system's main circuit was failing. "Looks worse than I thought," he muttered. "I can fix it, but I'll need your help." She froze once more, this time not in fear but in uncertainty. Ethan held out a small tool, a universal wrench capable of adjusting both human and alien machinery. "Here," he said gently. "We can do this together." Her hand hovered above the tool, trembling. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and took it. Ethan smiled softly. "Thank you," he said. Then, without thinking, he added, "Darling." The effect was immediate. She froze completely, eyes wide, staring at him as if the words had stopped time itself. Her fingers tightened around the tool, and she seemed to shrink inward, uncertain what to do next. Ethan froze too, realizing that he had said something unusual. He had meant it in a friendly, encouraging way, but the reaction told him it was more than just a word. She had never been called that before. I didn't mean to startle you," he said quickly, keeping his tone gentle. "It's just a word. I use it to show kindness." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Her hands loosened slightly on the tool. Ethan felt a small spark of connection, something fragile, but real. They worked together in silence, moving carefully around the generator. Sparks flew occasionally, and Ethan guided her hands when necessary. He noticed how meticulous she was, how precise her movements were, but also how hesitant she remained. Each gesture seemed measured, cautious, as if the smallest mistake could bring danger. By the time the generator was fully repaired, the woman's posture had relaxed a little. She stepped back, examining Ethan with a curious intensity. Ethan, in turn, studied her. He realized she had been alone for a long time, perhaps isolated from others of her kind. Her reactions, her hesitation, the way she froze at a simple word, it was as if she had never known kindness before. "You did well," he said sincerely. "The generator is stable. You helped me more than you realize." She looked at him, her eyes softening. She said nothing, but for the first time, she did not flinch or freeze. Ethan smiled. "Thank you, darling," he said again, softly this time. Her reaction was different now. She blinked but did not freeze. Instead, she seemed to absorb the words, as if trying to understand their meaning. A faint warmth appeared, in her eyes, a recognition that surprised Ethan. He realized something important. Small gestures, small words, could have a profound impact. He had no idea what her life had been like, how much she had endured, but he could see that respect and kindness mattered. Even in the harshest environments, humanity's strength was in compassion as much as in skill or courage. "Do you have a name?" he asked, curious. She paused, her gaze drifting away from him. Then, softly, almost a whisper, she said, "Lyra." "Lyra," Ethan repeated. "It's a beautiful name. I'm Ethan." He extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment, then slowly placed her own hand in his. It was cold but steady. A simple gesture, but it felt significant. For a being who had lived alone, isolated, trust was something rare and precious. They continued working, together through the day, checking other systems, reinforcing damaged conduits. Each time Ethan spoke, he was careful to keep his tone gentle, his words encouraging. Each time he used kind words, calling her darling when appropriate, he saw a small change in her demeanor. She smiled faintly at his jokes, mimicked his movements with curiosity, and began to communicate more openly through gestures and small sounds. By the time the sun, or what passed for sun on Thyra 9, set behind the icy horizon, the colony was secure, and the main energy systems were stabilized. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. Lyra stood beside him, watching the lights flicker in the newly repaired corridors. "You did well today," Ethan said, smiling. "The colony owes you a lot." Her eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. It was the first sign of genuine emotion he had seen all day. Ethan realized that this was only the beginning, not just of repairing the colony, but of building trust, understanding, and a connection that went beyond words. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. In a universe full of dangers, technology, and cold calculations, humanity's true power was in its ability to care, to reach out, and to recognize the worth in others. For Lyra, a single word, darling, had been enough to crack the walls she had built around herself. And for Ethan, seeing her reaction reminded him why he had chosen to help, why he believed in kindness even in the harshest corners of space. As night fell over Thyra 9, the wind howling outside the colony, Ethan looked at Lyra and smiled. She was still cautious, still learning, but the spark of trust was there. And sometimes that spark was all it took to begin something extraordinary. The next morning, the colony of Thyra 9 was alive with the usual clanging and humming of machines. Ethan was already walking through the corridors, inspecting the conduits and making sure all systems remained stable after the previous day's repairs. He had noticed something different in Lyra. She was no longer hiding or retreating at every sound. Instead, she followed him at a careful distance, her eyes curious and alert. "Good morning, darling," Ethan said softly, smiling as he noticed her hesitation. She froze for a moment, then blinked and nodded. Her reaction was slower now, less startled. It was progress. Lyra had never interacted with anyone in this way before. She had survived alone on the icy planet for months, perhaps years, and the few visitors she had encountered were either afraid of her or simply did not notice her at all. Ethan's kindness was new to her, his patience, his gentle tone, and the way he trusted her. These were things she had never experienced. Ethan knelt down at a broken panel in the corner, examining loose wires. Lyra stood beside him, mimicking his movements, her small hands hovering above the tools. "Careful," Ethan said, guiding her fingers gently to hold a wire in place. "See? Just like that. Good." Her face lit up briefly, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. Ethan noticed and nodded. "You're learning fast. I knew you could do it." They moved through the colony together, repairing minor damages and strengthening conduits. Ethan explained everything he did, speaking slowly so Lyra could follow. She listened intently, her head tilting at unfamiliar words, her hands ready to assist. Every now and then, he would call her darling, carefully watching her reaction. Each time. The pause in her movement was shorter, her hesitation less. She was beginning to understand the warmth behind the word. Other colonists started noticing their partnership. Some whispered, curious about this pale, silver-haired woman who seemed so reserved and yet so skilled. They had assumed she was dangerous or uncooperative, but as Ethan and Lyra worked, it became clear that she was intelligent and resourceful. Ethan never tried to explain her to anyone. He believed that she would reveal herself on her own terms. At one point, a warning siren blared through the colony. A small section of the power grid had overloaded and sparks flew dangerously close to a storage unit filled with oxygen canisters. Ethan reacted instantly, rushing toward the hazard. Lyra followed, her movements precise and quick, helping him hold a conduit in place while he rerouted the energy. "You're brave," Ethan said, impressed, "and very smart." Lyra froze for a split second at his words, then nodded. There was no fear in her eyes, only focus and determination. Ethan realized she had begun to trust him. She was learning that she could act without fear of judgment or harm. After the crisis was averted, Ethan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Lyra stood a few feet away, silent but observing him carefully. Ethan smiled. "See? We make a good team, don't we?" For the first time, Lyra spoke. Her voice was soft, melodic, almost hesitant. "Yes," she said, barely above a whisper. Ethan's smile widened. "That's great, darling," he said gently. She froze, startled by the word again, but this time. Her pause lasted only a second. She blinked and then looked at him, a faint warmth in her gaze. It was as if the word had begun to feel safe. Over the next few hours, Ethan continued to teach her about the colony's systems. He explained the layout, the purpose of each machine, and the dangers of miscommunication or error. Lyra absorbed everything with remarkable speed. She asked questions through gestures, pointing at components and drawing shapes in the air. Ethan learned to interpret her language, understanding her curiosity and intelligence. During a short break, they sat near the observation window overlooking the icy plains. Ethan poured 2 cups of hot water into metal cups and handed one to Lyra. She took it with a cautious nod, bringing it slowly to her lips. The warmth of the drink seemed to comfort her, and she let out a soft sigh. "You've never had anything like this before, have you?" Ethan asked gently. She shook her head, her silver hair brushing her shoulders. Ethan smiled. "Well, it's simple, but it's good. Sometimes small comforts can make a big difference." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide and thoughtful. For a moment, she froze, as if trying to process not just the drink, but the gesture itself. Ethan realized that for her, trust was more than words. It was in actions, in care, in moments of shared attention. When they returned to the work, Ethan assigned her tasks that matched her growing skills. She adjusted circuits, tightened bolts, and monitored the energy flow. Each time she completed a task, Ethan praised her, sometimes saying darling to show warmth. Each time she paused briefly, but the pause was different now. It carried curiosity and recognition rather than fear. As the day progressed, Lyra began to mimic Ethan's expressions. When he smiled, she tried a small smile of her own. When he laughed quietly at a minor mistake, she tilted her head and let out a soft, musical sound that seemed like laughter. Ethan noticed and laughed softly. See? You're learning more than just the machines. By evening, the repairs were complete. The colony hummed with stable energy, lights shining warmly against the gray sky outside. Ethan wiped his hands and turned to Lyra. You did amazing today, he said sincerely. I couldn't have done it without you. Lyra's lips curved slightly, her eyes reflecting the light of the corridors. She looked at him, frozen for a moment, then said softly, Thank you. You're welcome, darling, Ethan replied, smiling gently. She blinked, and for the first time she didn't freeze at the word. Instead, she seemed to understand it, a word carrying recognition, warmth, and respect. Ethan realized that trust was growing between them. Lyra had begun to open up, not just to him, but to the possibility of connection. In a world so cold and isolated, this small spark of understanding was precious. Before leaving for the night, Ethan checked the final systems, ensuring everything was functioning properly. Lyra followed him silently, carrying a small toolkit she had chosen herself. Her actions were no longer hesitant. They were deliberate, confident, showing the progress she had made. At the observation window once more, they looked out at the frozen plains. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. Lyra stood beside him, her silver hair catching the dim light. You're different from the others, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned to her. I try to be, he replied. I believe everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves kindness. Lyra paused, her gaze shifting to the horizon. She didn't speak again, but Ethan could sense her thoughts. She was thinking about the day, about the words, about the trust she had begun to feel. For Ethan, the day had reinforced a simple truth. Even in the harshest conditions, even on a distant planet far from Earth, humanity's strength was in connection, in patience, and in recognizing the value in others. Lyra was learning that, and in turn he was reminded of the power of small gestures. As they prepared to rest for the night, Ethan looked at Lyra once more. Tomorrow, he said softly, we'll continue. There's so much more to show you, and I think you'll like it. Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting something new, curiosity, trust, and the faintest hint of a smile. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The spark between them had been lit, and with patience and respect it could grow into something extraordinary. Outside, the winds of Thyra 9 howled against the colony walls, cold and relentless. Inside, two beings, human and alien, had found a connection, fragile but real. And in that connection, both of them felt something they had not felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, the cold was sharper than ever. The storm had passed, leaving behind a frozen wasteland that stretched endlessly under a pale sky. Ethan stepped out of the colony, his boots crunching against the snow. The temperature sensors read far below what humans could comfortably endure, yet the planet's alien air, though thin, had grown easier to breathe for Lyra. She followed close behind, her eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that was both natural and learned. Since the storm, she had moved with more confidence, acting independently when necessary, but always ready to coordinate with Ethan. He had begun to trust her instincts as much as his own. Something is off, Ethan said, squinting against the glare of the sun reflecting off the ice. The readings aren't normal. Lyra tilted her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I see it too, she said, her voice calm but urgent. Structures, moving. Ethan felt a chill run through him that had nothing to do with the cold. From this distance, he could just make out shapes. Dark, angular forms shifting across the ice, moving steadily toward the colony. They were not ships. The readings indicated mass, mechanical mass, and energy signatures unlike anything they had encountered before. "Prepare the defenses," Ethan said quickly, turning back to the colony. "If those things reach the walls, we can't afford to be caught off guard." Lyra nodded. She ran ahead to the main control hub, her movements precise. She interfaced with the colony's systems, activating shields, energy stabilizers, and defensive drones. Her hands flew over the control panel, coordinating energy distribution with an efficiency that rivaled the colony's automated AI. Ethan joined her, working side by side. "Lyra, I need you to monitor the energy fluxes and predict the movements of those machines. I'll handle the drones and defenses." "I can do that," she replied, her voice steady. Her eyes glowed faintly from the reflected light of the holographic interface, scanning, analyzing, and projecting calculations faster than Ethan could follow. As the mechanical shadows approached, Ethan activated the first line of drones. They rose from the launch pads, hovering and waiting for his command. The machines outside moved deliberately, almost like a coordinated strike force. The air vibrated with energy, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment. This was no random threat. Someone, or something, had sent them. Lyra pointed to a screen. 3 of them are scanning for weaknesses. They're trying to find a way through the shields." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll make sure they don't find one." He directed the drones toward the advancing machines, issuing commands to intercept and distract. Sparks flew as drones collided with the attackers, sending bursts of energy into the icy air. Lyra analyzed the patterns. "Ethan, the central unit, it's controlling the others. If we disable it, the rest will lose coordination." "Then that's our target," Ethan said. He grabbed a hover pod from the bay and climbed in, motioning for Lyra to follow. "We'll strike directly." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then climbed in beside him. She had learned to trust Ethan's judgment even in moments of extreme danger. The pod lifted off the ground, moving swiftly toward the central unit of the approaching machines. The wind whipped past them as they neared the target. Ethan's hands were steady on the controls, but his heart raced. Lyra, sitting beside him, monitored the energy fluctuations, guiding him with precise directions. "There," she pointed. "Deploy the pulse disruptor here. It will disable the central unit if timed correctly." Ethan nodded, following her instructions. The pulse disruptor released a shockwave of energy that spread outward, hitting the central unit. Sparks flew, lights blinked erratically, and the machines outside faltered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. "It worked," Lyra exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with satisfaction. But the celebration was short-lived. Another wave of machines emerged from the horizon, larger and more heavily armored than the first. Ethan realized that this was not a small attack. This was an organized assault. "Lyra, we need a strategy," he said. "We can't take them all head-on," she thought, for a moment, then spoke with clarity. "We use the terrain. The ice plains have cracks and crevices. If we lure them into those areas, their weight will slow them down. The drones can then target weak points while they are stuck." Ethan's eyes widened. "You're thinking tactically. Very good." Together, they executed the plan. Ethan guided the drones to harass and bait the machines toward the crevices. Lyra calculated the exact points where the ice was weakest, predicting where the machines would stumble. One by one, the attackers fell into the traps, their movements slowed and energy output compromised. The central unit of the second wave moved differently. It seemed smarter, more adaptive. Ethan realized it was learning from their tactics. "Lyra," he said, "we need to disrupt its sensors before it adapts completely." She nodded, already working on a plan. "We can create an energy decoy. It will think there's a weakness there, draw its attention, and we can strike from behind." Ethan executed the maneuver, releasing a holographic projection of a vulnerable area. The central unit shifted toward it, exposing its rear. The drones, guided by Ethan and Lyra, attacked with precision. Sparks flew, metal screeched, and the central unit fell, its systems shutting down. Ethan and Lyra watched as the remaining machines, now without coordination, malfunctioned and collapsed across the icy plains. The threat had been neutralized for now. Breathing heavily, Ethan turned to Lyra. "You were incredible. I couldn't have done it without you." She looked at him, a small smile forming. "We did it together. That's what matters." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride and connection. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had relied on each other, combining human ingenuity and Lyra's unique abilities. Together, they had saved the colony. As they returned to the colony, Ethan reflected on the events. Lyra had grown immensely, not just in skill but in confidence, courage, and understanding. She was no longer a passive participant. She was an equal partner, someone he could depend on in life-threatening situations. Inside, the colonists were emerging from shelters, cautious but unharmed. Ethan and Lyra moved through the halls, ensuring that systems were stable and no damage had been done. Their teamwork had set a standard, a model for cooperation between humans and other intelligent beings. By evening, the cold outside had softened slightly, the storm long gone, leaving a calm but tense atmosphere. Ethan and Lyra stood once more, by the observation window, surveying the icy plains where the machines had fallen. "They'll be back," Ethan said quietly. "We can't assume this was the only attack." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Then we prepare. We learn. We grow stronger." Ethan smiled. "Exactly. And with you by my side, I believe we can handle anything." Lyra met his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. She had learned to trust him, to value his guidance, and to act independently when needed. Their bond had deepened through shared danger, mutual respect, and reliance on each other's abilities. Night fell over Thyra 9, the icy plains reflecting the pale light of distant stars. Inside the colony, humans and Lyra worked side by side, reinforcing systems, analyzing energy fluctuations, and preparing for whatever threats might come next. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed the strength of their partnership, a combination of human resilience and Lyra's extraordinary talents. Ethan realized that survival on Thyra 9 was not just about technology or skill, it was about trust, cooperation, and adaptability. Lyra embodied all of those qualities, and together, they had proven that humanity's strength could extend beyond species, bridging gaps and creating alliances in the harshest environments. As they prepared for rest, Ethan reflected on the day. He had seen courage, intelligence, and adaptability in Lyra. He had witnessed growth, learning, and the ability to face danger with calm determination. And most importantly, he had seen the bond that could exist between beings from different worlds, one built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Lyra, observing the colony's systems before finally allowing herself to rest, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced the unknown, adapted, and contributed in ways she never thought possible. Her confidence had grown, and her trust in Ethan had become unwavering. Together they had faced danger and emerged victorious. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Ethan knew, but with Lyra at his side, he was ready for them. The partnership they had forged would guide them through the harshest environments, the most dangerous threats, and the unknown reaches of the galaxy. And in that bond, they had found, more than survival, they had found purpose, understanding, and the potential for something extraordinary. The first light of Thyra 9's sun broke over the frozen horizon, casting a pale glow across the icy plains. The colony, quiet after the night's battle, seemed almost peaceful in the soft morning light. Yet beneath that calm, Ethan and Lyra knew the planet still held dangers. They had won today, but survival on this alien world was never guaranteed. Ethan stepped onto the observation deck, his breath visible in the cold air. Lyra was already there, her eyes scanning the horizon, alert as ever. She had slept only briefly, her mind working through strategies and contingencies. Humans could learn, adapt, and endure. But Lyra's instincts gave them an edge no human alone could have. "They're gone for now," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. The machines won't be back immediately. Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. For now, she agreed. But we must prepare. They were not random attacks. Someone sent them here, someone who knows how to strike efficiently. Ethan nodded. I know. But we also have something they don't: creativity, intuition, and the ability to work together. He looked at Lyra, seeing determination in her gaze. We survived because we trusted each other. That's our advantage. Lyra allowed a small smile. Then we strengthen that bond. We train, we plan, and we stay ready. Together they returned to the colony, where humans were repairing minor damage and restoring systems. The drones, once busy defending against the machines, were now performing maintenance, their movements precise and synchronized. Ethan and Lyra coordinated efforts, assigning tasks and ensuring every system functioned optimally. Hours passed quickly, but the sense of vigilance never left them. Even with the immediate threat gone, Ethan knew that Thyra 9 could challenge them in unexpected ways. The planet was unforgiving, and survival required constant awareness, adaptability, and cooperation. By midday, Ethan and Lyra had inspected every defensive system, recalibrated sensors, and run simulations of potential attacks. Each scenario reinforced one lesson. Humans alone were strong. Lyra alone was exceptional, but together they were unstoppable. As they paused near the central hub, Lyra spoke quietly. Ethan, you have taught me something important. Trust in another being. Not just instinctively, but fully. That is rare for my kind. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. And you've taught me that intelligence and courage come in many forms. That strength is not only about physical ability, but about understanding and adaptability. Their shared experiences had created more than trust. They had formed a partnership that transcended species, a bond built on mutual respect, reliance, and the shared struggle of survival. Suddenly, an alert sounded. A sensor reading indicated movement on the far edge of the plains. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a glance, tension instantly rising. The machines, or something else? They hurried to the observation deck. In the distance, they saw small figures moving across the ice. At first, they seemed like faint shadows, but as they drew closer, it became clear. They were not machines. They're scouts, Lyra said, her voice sharp. But humanoid, not mechanical. Ethan squinted, adjusting the sensors. The readings confirmed it. These were alien beings, humanoid in form, and they were advancing cautiously toward the colony. Friendly or hostile? Ethan asked, already knowing that any encounter could be dangerous. Lyra studied them. Unknown, but their movement is calculated. They're observing, not attacking immediately. Ethan nodded. Then we do what we did before. Prepare, but wait. They watched as the scouts approached, keeping a safe distance. Ethan's mind raced, considering options. Direct communication might be risky, but it could also prevent unnecessary conflict. Lyra stepped forward, activating the colony's communication array. A universal translator began to process the alien language, displaying fragmented but understandable phrases. One of the scouts raised a hand, speaking slowly. We come in peace. We observed the machines. We saw your actions. We wish to understand. Ethan felt relief, tempered with caution. They're not here to fight, he said. But we must remain alert. Lyra nodded. Agreed. We engage carefully. Ethan and Lyra met the scouts at the edge of the colony. The aliens were taller than humans, with lean bodies and reflective skin that shimmered slightly under the sun. Their eyes, large and intelligent, studied Ethan and Lyra with curiosity rather than hostility. I am Ethan, he said calmly. This is Lyra. You saw what happened. We defended our home against the machines. Who are you? The lead scout spoke. I am Cairo. We are observers from the outer sector. The machines were sent by a faction seeking control of this region. We study and protect. We saw your coordination. You acted with skill and unity. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra. We survived together. That is our strength, and we will continue to survive together. Lyra added, "You can trust that we act with purpose. We defend our home, but we also seek allies when possible." Cairo's expression softened. "Then perhaps we can learn from each other. There is wisdom in partnership. We have studied many species, but few demonstrate the combination of strategy, courage, and cooperation that we see in you both." Ethan felt pride, but also a sense of responsibility. This encounter could change the future of Thyra 9. "Then we share knowledge. Together we can prepare for threats beyond these plains." Cairo nodded. "Yes, together." The scouts joined the colony, observing the systems, the drones, and the defensive strategies. Lyra explained energy flow, defensive protocols, and predictive algorithms. Ethan guided Cairo through simulations of potential attacks, showing how human ingenuity complemented Lyra's advanced skills. As the day turned to night, a sense of accomplishment filled the colony. They had survived attacks, neutralized the machines, and now had potential allies in the scouts. Ethan and Lyra stood side by side, looking out at the icy horizon, no longer alone in the vast expanse of Thyra 9. "Tomorrow, we begin joint training," Lyra said softly, her eyes reflecting determination. "We prepare for anything." Ethan nodded. "And we remain vigilant. Thyra 9 is harsh, but together we are stronger than any challenge it can throw at us." Lyra smiled faintly. "It is more than survival now. It is learning, growing, and building connections that extend beyond this planet." Ethan agreed. He knew that the universe was vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous, but he also knew that the human spirit, combined with allies like Lyra, could rise to meet any threat. Trust, strategy, and courage were their greatest weapons. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars twinkling faintly in the cold air. The fallen machines lay scattered across the plains, remnants of a test they had passed together. The scouts moved carefully, observing and learning, preparing for a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. Ethan placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "We've come far, haven't we?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting both pride and hope. "Yes, and the journey is just beginning." Together, they returned to the command center, ready to plan, train, and face the challenges that would inevitably come. The colony was safe, for now, but they both knew that survival was not about luck. It was about preparation, unity, and the ability to adapt. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new decisions, and new opportunities. But Ethan and Lyra had proven that humans and allies working together could overcome the odds, protect their home, and create something stronger than fear, something built on trust, courage, and cooperation. As they stood overlooking the plains, one last time before resting, Ethan whispered, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Lyra nodded. Together. The icy wind of Thyra 9 swept across the colony, carrying with it both challenges and hope. The dawn had arrived, and with it the promise of a future where humans and allies could not only survive but thrive. And at the center of it all, two beings, different in origin, united in purpose, stood ready to face the universe side by side. The stars shone above, witnesses to the bond forged in adversity, the courage proven against impossible odds, and the beginning of a story that would echo across the galaxy. For Ethan and Lyra, this was more than survival. It was a testament to the strength of unity, the power of trust, and the enduring spirit of humans reaching beyond their limits, shaping a future where even the harshest worlds could become home. The following morning, the winds outside Thyra 9 had grown stronger. Snow whipped across the icy plains, driven by gusts that rattled the colony's metal walls. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and checked the external sensors. The weather patterns were abnormal, violent, unpredictable. The colony had survived storms before, but this one seemed different. Lyra stood beside him, her silver hair blown across her face by the gusts. She had begun to move with more confidence, her hands steady as she adjusted instruments and monitored readings. Ethan noticed the difference immediately. Yesterday she had hesitated at each step. Today she acted deliberately, analyzing, calculating, and assisting without prompting. "We need to secure the external panels," Ethan said, pointing to the walls of the colony. "If the storm gets worse, it could damage the energy conduits." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting determination. She followed him outside, the wind biting at her skin, but she moved quickly, helping him tighten the panels and reinforce the framework. Ethan watched her carefully. There was strength in her that went beyond physical ability. It was awareness, intelligence, and adaptability, a combination that made her invaluable. As they worked, the colony's alert system beeped. Ethan checked his device. A transport shuttle approaching the colony had deviated from its planned course. It was coming in fast, dangerously fast, and the storm made visibility nearly zero. "Lyra," Ethan called, pointing toward the shuttle's projected path. "We need to prepare for a possible emergency landing." Her eyes widened briefly, then she nodded. Without hesitation, she moved to assist, helping Ethan calculate a safe landing corridor. Together, they coordinated with the colony's automated systems, rerouting energy to the guidance beacons and adjusting the landing area's magnetic stabilizers. The shuttle descended through the blizzard, engines straining against the wind. Sparks flew from its landing struts as it made contact with the icy ground. Ethan and Lyra rushed to the hatch as it hissed open. Inside were two pilots, struggling to keep their balance. Ethan moved first, guiding them to safety. Lyra followed, her hands steady, supporting one of the pilots who had slipped on the icy floor. "Thank you," one of the pilots gasped. "We lost control in the storm." Ethan nodded. "You're safe now. The colony can handle the repairs." He glanced at Lyra, who was adjusting a panel to stabilize the shuttle's internal systems. Her actions were precise, efficient, and calm under pressure. After the pilots were settled, Ethan turned to Lyra. "You did well," he said sincerely. "You handled that perfectly." She paused, blinking, then gave a faint nod. The trust between them had deepened. She was no longer just reacting to his guidance. She was thinking ahead, anticipating problems and acting on her own. As night approached, the storm intensified. The colony's lights flickered, and the walls groaned under the force of the wind. Ethan knew they had to act fast to prevent damage to the external conduits. "Lyra," he said, motioning to the main energy junction outside. "We need to stabilize the grid before it overloads." Her eyes brightened and she followed him without hesitation. Together they navigated the icy terrain, reinforcing connections and rerouting energy. Lyra's understanding of the systems was remarkable. She suggested adjustments that Ethan would not have thought of, showing not just skill but intuition. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the storm. One of the external energy pylons had snapped under the pressure of the wind. Sparks flew dangerously close to the colony's walls. Ethan's heart raced. "Hold this line," he shouted to Lyra, handing her a stabilization tool. "I'll reroute the energy from the broken pylon." Lyra grasped the tool firmly, her hand steady despite the chaos around them. Sparks danced along the metal frame, but she did not flinch. Ethan rerouted the energy, carefully redirecting power to prevent a catastrophic overload. The air was thick with tension, but together they managed to stabilize the system. When the sparks finally died down, Ethan exhaled deeply. "We did it," he said, looking at Lyra. She looked back at him, eyes wide, then nodded once. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that they could rely on each other, even in the most dangerous situations. Inside the colony, they checked the remaining systems. Ethan noticed Lyra examining the energy readings with an intensity he had not seen before. She pointed to a section of the grid that was still unstable. "That area needs attention," she said softly, her voice confident. Ethan smiled. "Good. Catch. Let's go." They worked through the night, moving efficiently, communicating with gestures and short phrases. The storm outside raged on, but inside the colony, they created a small pocket of order. Ethan realized that Lyra's abilities were exceptional, not just her intelligence, but her courage and resilience. She had survived alone in harsh conditions, and now she was thriving under guidance. showing a capacity for problem-solving and quick thinking that rivaled trained humans. By dawn, the storm had weakened, leaving the colony intact and fully operational. Ethan and Lyra stood near the observation window, watching the icy plains in the soft light of morning. The wind had calmed, leaving a quiet stillness over the snow-covered landscape. "You were amazing," Ethan said, turning to her. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and something else, a quiet bond that had formed through shared danger and cooperation. Ethan realized that this connection was different from anything he had experienced before. It was built on trust, respect, and mutual reliance. In a universe full of challenges, this bond was more powerful than any machine or technology. For Lyra, the experience had been transformative. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Yet she had learned to work with someone else, to trust, and to act with confidence. Ethan's kindness and patience had unlocked something within her, a willingness to engage, to communicate, and to collaborate. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes?" he asked, curious. I understand now," she said, hesitating. You help because you care." Ethan nodded. "Exactly, Lyra. Caring is what makes us human. It's what helps us survive, not just physically but emotionally. And it's why I trust you." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time she smiled fully, a small but genuine expression of emotion. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. The harshest environment imaginable, on a planet where survival was never guaranteed, they had found something rare: trust, cooperation, and a spark of friendship. The day passed quietly after the storm, with minor repairs and routine checks. Ethan noticed Lyra moving with more confidence than ever, her movements fluid and assured. She began to initiate tasks on her own, suggesting improvements to the colony's systems, and even predicting potential issues before they arose. Ethan was impressed. Her abilities were extraordinary, and yet she remained humble, focused, and calm. As evening approached, Ethan gathered his tools. "Tomorrow," he said, looking at Lyra, "we'll continue training and improving the systems. But for now, rest. You've earned it." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the dimming lights of the colony. Ethan could see a quiet determination in her expression, a readiness to continue, to learn, and to grow. She had changed in a short time, and he knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside, the plains of Thyra 9 were silent, blanketed in snow and ice. Inside, two beings, human and alien, had faced a storm together, relying on skill, intelligence, and trust. The bond between them had deepened, and with it, the potential for extraordinary achievements. Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. Lyra's talents, combined with human ingenuity and courage, could transform the colony, ensure survival, and perhaps even change the future of humanity's interaction with alien life. And in the quiet moments, when words were not needed, they understood each other completely, a connection forged through action, respect, and shared experience. As night fell, Ethan looked at Lyra and smiled. She returned the gesture, small but meaningful. Tomorrow they would continue their work, facing new challenges, learning from each other, and strengthening the bond that had begun in the cold and isolation of Thyra 9. In that moment, Ethan knew something profound. Humanity's strength was not only in technology or skill, but in the ability to connect, to care, and to trust. And in Lyra, he had found someone who embodied that truth in ways words could barely describe.